Welcome to Storytelling and Beyond, where stories come alive and touch hearts. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another emotional and life-changing story again. The rain fell with a quiet fury that evening, soaking the streets in silver reflections. The sky, heavy and dull, mirrored the weight Daniel carried on his shoulders as he pulled into the diner's nearly empty parking lot. His daughter, Lily, barely 6, sat quietly in the back seat, her small fingers tracing shapes on the fogged window. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He was exhausted. 2 jobs, endless bills, and the haunting quiet that came with losing the love of his life, it was all too much. But dinner had to happen, and tonight, takeout was the only option. He scooped Lily up in his arms, shielding her from the rain with his coat as they ran toward the flickering neon sign that buzzed quietly, Maggie's Diner. Inside, the warmth hid like a soft blanket, the smell of coffee and fried potatoes lingering in the air. The place was mostly empty, just a few late-night regulars hunched over mugs and newspapers. Behind the counter stood Sophie, in a faded uniform, her hair tied back in a messy bun, fatigue pooling in her eyes. She looked up as the door jingled, catching sight of the man and the little girl, both dripping and tired. Sophie plastered on a polite smile, the kind that came from years of practice, not sincerity. "Booth or counter?" she asked, her voice flat but not unkind. "Booth," Daniel replied curtly, brushing raindrops from Lily's curls. He didn't look at Sophie. He was in no mood for small talk. Sophie grabbed 2 menus and led them silently to a corner booth. She noticed how Lily clung to her father's jacket, how he held her hand a little too tightly, as if afraid to let go. "Anything to drink?" Sophie asked. "Hot chocolate for her." "Coffee." "Black," Daniel said, without looking up. Sophie nodded and left. She had seen his type before retired, worn-down men who came in with walls higher than buildings. But something in Lily's eyes, those big, curious eyes, made Sophie's heart ache. Behind the counter, Sophie poured the drinks with practiced grace. She was used to hiding her own story, the crushing debt her mother left behind, the eviction notice under her pillow, the constant hum of survival that never left her mind. She worked 3 shifts back-to-back because there was no one else to rely on. No safety net. No time to cry. She brought the drinks over. Lily beamed at her. "Thank you," the little girl said sweetly. Sophie smiled genuinely this time. "You're very welcome, sweetheart." Daniel glanced up briefly, meeting Sophie's eyes for the first time. There was a flicker of something, maybe surprise at her kindness, but it passed quickly. He looked away. "I'll give you a few minutes," she said. A silence settled over the table as Lily sipped her hot chocolate and Daniel scrolled through his phone, checking work emails. Sophie watched them from the counter. They looked out of place, like a chapter torn from another book and pasted into this one. She felt something stir in her, not pity, but recognition. 2 souls just trying to make it through the day. Minutes later, she returned for the order. "Grilled cheese and fries," Daniel said for Lily. "And a burger for me." "No pickles." Sophie scribbled on her pad and nodded. "Coming right up." As she walked away, Lily leaned over to whisper to her dad, "She's nice." Daniel didn't answer. He was somewhere else, in bills, in memories, in a moment when life was less complicated. But Sophie heard it. And it softened something inside her. Back in the kitchen, as the cook slapped patties onto the grill, Sophie found herself glancing back at their booth more than once. Lily was drawing on a napkin with a crayon she had found in her jacket pocket. Daniel had finally put down his phone and was watching her, eyes tired but filled with a love only a father could know. When the food arrived, Sophie carefully placed the plates on the table. "Extra ketchup for the fries," she said to Lily with a wink. "Yay!" Lily grinned. Daniel gave a small nod. "Thanks." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The rest of the meal passed with quiet murmurs. No deep conversation, no grand revelations. Just food, warmth, and a tiny spark of something unspoken. When the check came, Daniel reached into his wallet and paused. Sophie noticed. He was doing the math again. She'd seen it too many times in others. quiet shame masked by a sigh. "Don't worry about the hot chocolate," she said softly. "It's on the house." He looked at her, startled. "Why?" She shrugged. "She made my night a little better." "That's worth more than $2." He stared at her for a moment. Then, with a ghost of a smile, said, "Thanks." As he and Lily got up to leave, Sophie watched them go. The rain had stopped. The night was still heavy, but a little less so. For both of them. That night, as Daniel buckled Lily into the car seat and Sophie wiped down empty tables, neither of them realized they just walked into each other's stories, not as extras, but as something far more significant. Sometimes, two broken paths cross not to collide, but to mend each other. And this was just the beginning. The days began to blend like soft brushstrokes across a canvas, subtle, slow, and quietly meaningful. Daniel became a regular at Maggie's diner. Not out of convenience, not entirely out of habit, but because Lily had grown attached to the woman behind the counter who always remembered she liked her fries crispy, not soggy, and who once tucked a paper butterfly into her palm when she said her day at school had been too hard. Sophie never asked why Daniel kept coming. She didn't need to. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the way he guarded himself like a fortress. He wasn't looking for company, he was surviving. And somehow, so was she. Each visit peeled back a layer. At first, their conversations were clipped and formal. Coffee, black. Fries for the kid. No sugar. Simple transactions. But in between the clinks of cups and scribbles of the notepad, something shifted. One afternoon, Sophie found herself wiping down the counter near their booth longer than necessary. Daniel had just finished a call, tension etched into every line on his face. "Everything okay?" she asked, cautiously. She regretted it the moment it slipped out, it wasn't her place. He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Yeah. Just work." She nodded, turning to leave, but something made him add, "Lost a client. Rent's due. You know how it goes." She paused, hands still gripping the rag. "Yeah. I really do." And just like that, the conversation wasn't about coffee anymore. That same week, Lily ran into the diner with a drawing clutched in her tiny hands, a crayon masterpiece of Sophie holding a tray, standing next to Lily and her dad beneath a rainbow. She gave it to Sophie with a shy grin. Sophie laughed, and then stopped, her eyes welled before she could stop them. No one had drawn her into a picture before. "Thank you, sunshine," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything, but something in him softened. Later that evening, as the last customers trickled out, Sophie brought over 2 milkshakes, 1 chocolate, 1 vanilla. She placed them on the table without a word. "What's this?" Daniel asked. She shrugged, leaning on the edge of the booth. "Lily said you've been too grumpy lately. I figured milkshakes might fix that." He looked at her, caught between offense and laughter. "She did, huh?" "She's not wrong." A pause. Then, he chuckled. The sound was unfamiliar coming from him, even to himself. They sat for a while, Sophie joining them after her shift. Lily talked animatedly, filling in the gaps they didn't know how to cross. But Daniel noticed the tiredness Sophie tried to mask, the way she rubbed her wrist when she thought no one was watching. He saw her hands, calloused, hard-working, the hands of someone who hadn't had the luxury of rest in a long time. "So," he said after Lily had skipped off to look at the jukebox, "how long you been working here?" "For years," she replied. "Since my mom got sick. Left college, picked up shifts. She passed away last year. Still trying to pay off the hospital bills." He was quiet for a moment. "That's rough." Sophie took a sip of her milkshake. "We all carry something, right?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah. Mine's just heavier on some days." She looked at him then, not just at his tiredness, but at the man beneath it. The one who showed up every day, who loved his daughter fiercely, who didn't know how to ask for help. And for the first time, she didn't see just another struggling customer. She saw someone trying to keep his world from falling apart. The more they spoke, the more their differences came alive. Sophie was spontaneous, emotionally open, the kind of person who believed laughter could be therapy. Daniel was structured, guarded, a firm believer in logic over feelings. He believed discipline held life together. She believed love did. They argued once, quietly but intensely, over Lily wanting to take a day off from school for a mental health break. She's a child, Daniel said firmly. Structure is good for her. She's also a person, Sophie countered. A little kindness now might teach her to be kinder to herself later. They didn't speak much that day. But that night, Daniel stared at the ceiling long after Lily had fallen asleep. Her tiny hand had curled around his. He thought of Sophie's words, a little kindness now. And the next morning, Lily stayed home. They made pancakes. She smiled all day. Sophie didn't know it, but Daniel was listening even when he disagreed. He, in turn, showed her a kind of resilience she hadn't known. Watching him tie Lily's shoes, walk her to the door, check her homework, even when he looked like he hadn't slept in days, it reminded Sophie that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was quiet, routine, and relentless. She began to wonder what it would be like to be cared for like that. As weeks passed, Maggie's diner became less of a job and more of a junction, a place where two struggling hearts paused long enough to hear each other's silences. A waitress and a widower. A girl who had lost a mother. A man still mourning a wife. So different. And yet, bound by a thread of invisible understanding. They didn't realize it yet, but they weren't healing alone anymore. And that, perhaps, was the first real miracle. The storm rolled in suddenly, without warning, dark clouds swallowing the evening sun, winds howling as if the sky itself had something to say. Daniel's old sedan sputtered along the drenched road, windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the rain's fury. Lily sat quietly in the back seat, her seatbelt snug, her wide eyes fixed on the streaks of water racing down the glass. They had just left the grocery store when the car jerked once, then again, and then groaned into stillness. Daniel tried the ignition. Nothing. Just a hollow click, and the slow hiss of steam rising from under the hood. He slammed the steering wheel once, frustration etched deep in his face. His phone had barely any charge, and no signal. He looked back at Lily, forcing calm into his voice. It's okay, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. The rain intensified. Just a few blocks away, Sophie was finishing her shift early. The diner had closed early due to the storm. She wrapped her jacket tighter around herself and stepped outside, umbrella barely holding against the wind. She noticed the car slumped by the curb, blinked, and then saw the small figure in the back seat. Her heart dropped. She rushed over, knocking on the fogged-up driver's side window. It slid down halfway. Daniel, she called out, surprised at her own worry. Are you okay? He exhaled, rain matting his hair. Car died. We're kind of stuck. Without hesitation, Sophie pointed to the small apartment building just across the street. I'm right there. Come on. Before the water reaches your knees. He hesitated. Pride flickered. Then Lily coughed softly from the back seat, and that was enough. Moments later, all three of them dashed through the rain, laughter bubbling from Lily as she tried to dodge puddles and failed spectacularly. Sophie's apartment was small, just one room, a kitchenette, and a threadbare couch, but it was warm, and it smelled like cinnamon and old books. Daniel set Lily on the couch, wrapping her in a dry towel Sophie had handed him. She moved around quickly, lighting candles as the power flickered and failed. I don't have much, she said softly, pouring water into a kettle for tea. But the roof doesn't leak, and there's some soup on the stove. Daniel looked around. The walls were decorated with pinned-up postcards and cutouts from travel magazines. A small bookshelf held a strange mix of cookbooks and poetry. The floor creaked when he stepped on it. But there was something about the place, lived in, worn, and full of heart. I didn't mean to crash your evening, he said, sitting down on the edge of the couch. Sophie handed him a towel, then a cup of tea. Maybe you did. But maybe I needed the company. They sat in silence for a while, Lily curled up between them, half asleep, the storm raging beyond the window. Candlelight flickered across their faces. "I miss her," Daniel whispered, more to himself than to her. "My wife. It's been 2 years, but some nights it still feels like I lost her yesterday." Sophie didn't speak. She reached for the kettle and poured more tea, allowing his grief the space to breathe. "I wasn't ready to be both parents. I still don't know if I'm doing it right. Sometimes I think Lily deserves more than a father who's just trying to hold it all together." Sophie leaned back, her eyes misting. "My mom used to say, trying is love in motion. After she died, I stopped trying. I figured, what was the point? I gave up on people. On being seen." Her voice cracked. "You're trying. And Lily? She doesn't need perfect. She needs present." Daniel turned to look at her. The candlelight caught the glint of tears in her eyes. And in that moment, something quiet and unspoken passed between them, not romance, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. A mirror held up to their shared ache. The storm continued, softer now. Outside, the world was still soaked and shivering. But inside Sophie's tiny apartment, a strange warmth settled. The kind that came from being seen, and not judged. From being broken, but still worthy of company. Lily stirred, reaching for Daniel's hand with one of hers, and for Sophie's with the other. Neither of them let go. Morning came with the gentlest light pouring through the thin curtains, casting a golden hue across Sophie's tiny apartment. The storm had passed, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and washed streets. Lily was still curled under the blanket on the couch, her hair tousled, one hand resting on Daniel's knee. Daniel had barely slept. Not because he was uncomfortable, but because his mind had refused to rest. Something about the night before had shifted something in him. The vulnerability he'd let slip in front of Sophie, the quiet understanding that had passed between them, it had unearthed feelings he thought he'd buried with his past. Sophie walked out of the kitchen, holding 2 chipped mugs of coffee. She handed him one without a word and sat down beside him on the floor, their backs against the couch. She was still in her oversized sweater, her hair loose and messy, her eyes soft with the hush of morning. They sipped in silence. "She trusts you," Daniel said after a while, nodding toward Lily. "She doesn't open up to many people." Sophie looked over at the sleeping girl and smiled faintly. "She's got a beautiful heart. Brave. Like someone raised her with a lot of love, even through all the pain." He looked down at his cup, turning it in his hands. "You're doing better than you think, Daniel." Her voice was quiet, but steady. Certain. He wanted to believe it. And for the first time in a long time, he almost did. Later that day, as the streets dried and the hum of everyday life returned, Daniel offered to fix Sophie's leaky kitchen tap, something she had complained about only once, in passing. He had a small toolkit in his car, and while Lily sat nearby coloring, Sophie watched as Daniel bent under the sink, sleeves rolled, hands steady. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." Something about that moment, the domestic simplicity of it, felt unfamiliar to both of them. Sophie wasn't used to someone showing up just to help. Daniel wasn't used to offering something that wasn't survival-based. They were building something without realizing it, not romance, not yet, but trust. Mutual, fragile, growing. After the tap was fixed, they sat on the fire escape together while Lily napped. Sophie handed him a small photo album. It held old pictures, her with her mother, birthdays celebrated with cheap cake and dollar store decorations, hospital bracelets, Sophie in her waitress uniform on her first day. "Why are you showing me this?" Daniel asked softly. "Because I don't let people in." "And I'm trying," she replied. "You opened up last night." "I wanted to," return the courage. He looked through each picture slowly, feeling the weight of her story in every frame. There was joy, pain, survival all there, unhidden. It moved him more than he could say. Then he pulled out his wallet and slid a small photo out, a picture of his wife holding newborn Lily, both smiling, caught in a beam of afternoon light. He hadn't shown it to anyone in a long time. She loved thunderstorms, he said. She said the sky needed to cry sometimes, just like we do. Sophie blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. You loved her deeply. I still do, he whispered. And you still can, Sophie said gently. Loving her doesn't mean you can't let someone new in. Daniel turned to her, caught off guard. I'm not saying it has to be now, Sophie continued. But maybe, one day. You deserve a second chapter. He didn't answer. But the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of possibility. That night, Daniel and Lily drove home. But something had changed. The distance between their two lives had narrowed. Daniel found himself checking his phone, wondering if he should text her, not because he needed help, but because he wanted to know how she was. And Sophie stood by her window, looking out into the night, missing the laughter of a little girl who had filled her apartment with life. They were no longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were becoming each other's safe place. A month passed like a quiet river winding through their lives, subtle, unspoken, but deeply felt. Daniel and Sophie had settled into a rhythm, though they never named it. Some mornings, Daniel would bring Sophie coffee before her shift. Some evenings, she'd join him and Lily for a walk in the park, where laughter echoed like music and Lily always ran ahead, fearless and free, knowing someone was always watching. But no journey of healing flows without interruption. And it came, sudden and sharp, in the form of a man from Sophie's past. His name was Derek. A tall shadow with a voice that used to charm and control in equal measure. He showed up at the diner one evening, drunk and arrogant, slurring her name like he still owned it. Sophie's hands trembled when she saw him. Her voice faltered. She hadn't seen Derek in over 2 years, not since he left her broke, and buried under debt he'd created in both their names. You think you're something now, he sneered in front of stunned customers. Still playing house with leftovers from the kitchen? Daniel, who had come to pick up Lily's favorite pie, saw the scene unfold. For a moment, rage swelled in him like a tidal wave. But then he saw Sophie's eyes, not afraid of Derek, but ashamed. As if her past had somehow invalidated her present. Daniel stepped forward calmly, placing himself between Derek and Sophie. That's enough, he said, voice low and firm. Derek smirked. Who's this? Her new charity case? Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. His presence, his calm, his refusal to rise to hate, it said everything. Leave, Daniel said simply. Something in his voice made even Derek hesitate. He scoffed, threw a mocking laugh into the air, and stumbled out into the night. The diner was silent. Sophie turned away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She fled to the kitchen, heart pounding, breath shaking. But Daniel followed her. He didn't touch her. He just stood at the doorway, quiet, steady. I didn't want you to see that, she whispered, wiping at her tears. He used to be my whole world. I thought he loved me. He loved what I gave him. When I had nothing left, he walked out. Daniel took a breath. I saw a woman who stood tall, he said softly. Even when everything in her past tried to drag her back. I saw someone brave enough to still show up, still care, still give. Sophie crumpled, the weight of years pressing down on her. What if I'm not enough? What if I'm just broken beyond repair? Daniel stepped forward now, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. We're all a little broken. But broken doesn't mean unworthy. It means you've survived. She looked up at him, eyes wide, vulnerable. I never thought someone like you could ever want someone like me. Daniel smiled faintly. Funny. I used to think the same about you. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. But something shifted, not with grand declarations, but with quiet resolve. With shared grief and mutual respect. With the realization that two damaged people could still build something whole. Later that week, Daniel invited Sophie and Lily to his home, not as guests, but as something more. They cooked dinner together. They danced in the kitchen, Lily on Daniel's feet, Sophie laughing as she stirred pasta. There was no pretense. Just warmth. Just healing. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching Lily chase fireflies, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sophie froze. It wasn't a ring. It was a key. He placed it in her hand without a word. She looked at him, heart thundering. Not rushing, he said. Just ready. When you are. Tears slipped down her cheek. She closed her fingers around the key. For the first time in her life, Sophie felt chosen, not for what she gave, not for what she could offer, but for who she was. Flaws and all. And Daniel, for the first time, felt peace. 2 stories. 2 survivors. One shared life ahead. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through late-night tea, shared silence, gentle hands, and the courage to stay. And sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings are built from broken pieces. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Storytelling and Beyond, where every tale reminds us that healing, hope, and love are never out of reach, no matter where we begin.